Oh,
Yang with the pin that says math instead of an American flag. How dare he?
nice. Yeah, I appreciate that. Going against the grain.
We'll be starting as soon as the last closing statement soon.
From the last good person.
Thanks for sticking around, even though this debate is going late. It's supposed to be over 10 minutes ago.
Oh, I don't want to hear Klobuchar. Do we have to?
No.
Let's turn it down. We'll turn it back up if we
Klobuchar
hear
is
good.
still trembling. She actually trembled for the entire debate and hasn't gotten comfortable.
Klobuchar did
She's still
really
shaky.
bad job.
Yeah, Klobuchar did bad. Although she was treated as if she was a top-tier candidate because, so many questions were tossed at her.
Yeah, I forgot that she was even in it.
She's not. I mean, she's really not. She's only in it and things like this in the media coverage.
Yeah. So before we get into this, Mike, welcome to our post-debate analysis coverage. We just wanted to follow up with a live stream that we did last week on the Bolivia coup, talking about our Gaza Fights for Freedom tour with just a little fun update on this insufferably boring debate that we just sat through for you. We did it for you, and hopefully we can provide some analysis so you didn't have to sit through it yourself. If you did, hopefully our commentary is a little bit better than what you just sat through. So, Mike, opening words before we get into even what the content of the debate was.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to hear the closing statements from the front runners, which maybe they're saving till the end because they knew people would turn this thing off if you heard the front runners first, and then you had to hear Klobuchar and Steyer and all these other people. So I think they put the most boring people first for their closing statement, it appears. But yeah, I mean, when we planned on doing this, we had this is what our fourth debate, and every debate has kind of had some heat. Some real zingers, like people actually going after each other, trying to rise in the polls by taking someone out or getting a lot of attention for going hard on an issue or against a candidate. This one, it seems that hasn't happened at all. This was definitely the most boring of all of them. And as we were watching it, we were thinking, maybe we would have even not done this thing if we knew it was going to be this bad. But what a fucking snoozer, man. Here's Kamala Harris giving her talk.
We don't want to hear her.
I guess we can watch the subtitles.
She's horrible. She's horrible. She's just awful.
Thanks, DID, for the super chat, man. You didn't sit through it. Good job. I mean,
yeah, no, you didn't.
Well, hopefully we can digest the most important parts for you if you stick around.
Yeah, you didn't need to. I mean, while Kamala Harris is droning on, basically before the debate even started, we had an MSNBC analysis that was just, throwing Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg, who was just artificially boosted as fuck at the top of these polls. I have no idea how he is being signal boosted like this. It is so unbelievably fake, but they're just propping him up like he's the next front runner. And of course, Joe Biden is still somehow leading every national poll and really just kind of taking the cake when you're going through these states. So it was just really bizarre because he is blowing it. In every debate, it seems like his brain is just ceasing to function. He's shutting down his motor skills and he can barely get two words out accurately. So it's really strange, Mike. I have no idea who is supporting Joe Biden. I mean, is there this many people with landlines and older people that are just completely, hitching their wagons to him at this point?
What was interesting is that they said, they're talking about Buttigieg, of course, propping him up as like a new front runner because of this one poll, this Iowa poll. And in fact, they made this comment saying, it's interesting that the Iowa poll is so out of sync with the rest of the national polls. I mean, he's in fourth or fifth place in national polls, but in Iowa, he's in first place by like 20 points. Like, how can that be? And it's because they're basing it all off this one Iowa poll, which had a sample size of 250 people total in Iowa, only 13% of whom were under the age of 35, which, there's like tons of college campuses where people will be voting, things like that. And so they've been running with this one poll from Iowa that was obviously intended to pick people that are going to give people like Biden and Buttigieg more of an edge over people like Bernie and Warren even. And they've just been running with this poll as this huge national story about how Buttigieg is now a front runner. And so they're kind of confused, saying, why is there a disconnect between, why isn't the rest of the country seeing what Iowa sees? And it's because, well, you're basing it off of 250 people over the age of 35.
And of course, right before the debate started, some commentator on MSNBC just said, really the most important thing in this debate on the heels of these impeachment hearings is who can beat Trump. That's all it's about. That's all that the corporate media has been obsessing about for the last, 2 years. So yeah, I mean, basically this commentator just said the most important thing that we need to understand, Mike, is that a socialist cannot be a psychopath.
Sociopath. Yeah, it was interesting. They were leading up to this thing just saying over and over again, the most important thing is beating Trump. I mean, all of the comment, actually, you know what? It's Bernie's closing statement. Should we hear it?
Sure.
Bernie's ending now.
He's finally saying a word about himself. He never gives anecdotes.
We should keep it down so we don't get flagged for copyright from MSNBC for going over the live stream. I'm going to make it so quiet they can't hear it.
Nice. He's talking about how he was arrested fighting for civil rights, how he comes from the working class. Unlike these kind of political campaigns by anecdotes from other candidates that are just insufferable,
Yeah, fake.
And also just like repeating nonsense about stories that you hear from people along the way that I feel like are 99% just fake. Completely, Bernie's actually saying something about his personal life that does make sense. He got arrested trying to fight the political establishment. And that's kind of what he calls for, is fighting the establishment with your bodies on the line. Nice.
There you go. Good closing statement, Bernie. I don't think do we need to hear the rest? Someone in the chat tell us if something interesting happens in the end.
I wanted to hear Tulsi's. I want to hear Bernie's. Gotta
turn Warren off. It's over. It's done.
I can't hear Warren. I'm sorry.
It's done. It's off.
Big structural Bailey.
Thank God the debate is over. But getting back to what we were talking about before, like we had MSNBC on, which actually, there's a recent study done that showed, analyzed the coverage that was being given to Biden, Warren, and Bernie by MSNBC on all of their shows. And so they listed all of the shows on MSNBC, all of the hosts, how much coverage they gave to each candidate, and what percentage of that coverage was positive versus negative. And I think you can probably guess what the results were, but Warren was covered the most and covered the most favorably, with 2 or 3 of their shows, like Rachel Maddow was one of them, giving actually 0 negative coverage to Warren. And so there is, I think, 3 shows that had a pie chart with just 0 negative coverage at all to Warren, but giving her the most amount of coverage. Biden was kind of in the middle, where he was given a lot of coverage, and he was given predominantly favorable coverage, but a bit more negative, far more negative coverage than Warren had been getting. And then you had Bernie, who got the least amount of coverage, and by far, like over 50% of it was negative coverage. And I think that, that was the context going into tonight's debate, that it's this network and all of the hosts on the panel were MSNBC hosts who were a part of this thing where that was leading to this kind of skewed coverage of Sanders. And so that's kind of what the background was. And then in the hour leading up to the debate to start, where you have, Brian Williams and Chris Matthews or whatever, giving all their commentary, they're saying beating Donald Trump is the only important thing. And we need a candidate to beat Donald Trump. And to beat Donald Trump, you need to be able to pull together Democrats and Republicans. In their minds, talking about you need to have a centrist, because I think that's what pulls together the left and the right, is a centrist. Like it's literally like a balancing beam, and there's like ideas are weights, and if you have to have left ideas and right ideas, and you put them together, and then it balances. Like that's not the reality. And so it's so funny that they ended with this thing saying, a sociopath will beat a socialist. So they concluded this entire argument about how we need to beat Trump. We need a candidate who can bring people together and beat Trump by saying Sanders is not that person because he's a socialist and Trump will beat a socialist, ignoring the fact that Sanders beats Trump more than anyone in all the polls, and that he is the only one that actually is winning over people who watch Fox News, people who say they are more conservative. I mean, he's the candidate that is, in actual numbers and in polls, bringing people together, as Chris Matthews was crying about. Thank you, Krillin, for the super chat. Appreciate that, man. We do have a P.O. box, and we will give that to you afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, the whole debate is always structured around attacking Tulsi Gabbard, Bernie Sanders, and it used to be, Andrew Yang as well. And
right.
It seemed like this time there was a couple fair questions to Andrew Yang, but it is absolutely despicable the way that these are framed and the way that Elizabeth Warren was just given question after question after question. It was so surreal to see that. But before we get into actually the content, I wanted to say something about Tom Steyer, who really did a bait and switch with this impeachment ad, getting this mailing list, and then he basically bought his way into
is that
the
how
debates.
he did it?
Yeah, because remember, he was the guy basically calling to impeach Trump. And so, of course,
Running
there's
all the
millions
ads.
of people who gave him their email address and stuff. And then he did a bait and switch where he was like, okay, actually, I'm running for president. And he paid the GDP of Uruguay to actually get on the debate stage tonight. Sure, I appreciate him talking about climate change, but also spend your goddamn money doing something useful, dude. Do we really need another person on the debate stage thinking that they're the smartest people in the universe? They're the smartest person in the world, Mike.
You know what's funny also about Steyer is that he actually just got busted for trying to pay people for endorsements. Like one of his campaign people had to admit it because they're like, if we don't report this for campaign finance stuff, we're going to get in trouble. So Steyer was literally, in particular in Iowa, going to popular political figures and politicians and literally just saying, I will pay you for your endorsement. I think that some of that may have actually been going on behind the scenes with like other candidates who just have, people who are suddenly very big supporters of them out of nowhere, doing a lot of work for them. Then it comes out that they're surrogates somehow. But it seems like this practice of shopping around for people that have some kind of public profile and giving them cash or a job for that doesn't seem abnormal, really. But Steyer was actually busted for trying to do it. The funny thing is that no one actually endorsed him, even though he was offering them money. The other candidates, I think, were a little more successful using that strategy.
Some more dough. But another funny comment about tonight was Pete Buttigieg trying to pretend like he's from the working class, Mike. When you put up him next to all the other candidates, he actually has the least amount of money. What's funny is he's actually been paid the most by billionaires. He is the darling of the billionaire's choice. So that was a pretty comical thing that Pete Buttigieg put out there. Really, really ridiculous.
Yeah, and that's interesting too because he's the poorest person on stage, I guess. I think the richest person is Elizabeth Warren by a lot. I mean, she has a net worth of like $14 million. Biden is second with $9 million. And so that gap, 9 to 14, more than like all the other candidates combined don't equal the amount that's in that gap, that like $4 million gap or something. But Buttigieg is doing all right too, as you say, with the donations. But if you look at like the price of his house in terms of like relative income, where he's from in South Bend or whatever, he's in like the top 1% or whatever.
So I guess I'm still confused about how Amy Klobuchar, Cory Booker, and Kamala Harris are still in the race. It seems like they're completely unlikable. How are they beating these polls? How are they, fulfilling the requirements to get on the debate stage? It's very surreal to me. I mean, who are their donors? It must be a lot of donors because I can't think of any other explanation. I feel like they have really very little popular support. As we know, Kamala Harris has just been tanking ever since that first peak that she made. One other quick comment is Rachel Maddow. I was surprised to see her as one of the moderators, considering her temper tantrum last time or the time before, where she literally stormed off set because she was angry at the audience for making too much noise. Very entitled, bizarre thing to do, Mike.
Yeah. She was supposed to be part of the post-debate analysis, and she just left because she was so frustrated. It was like, damn, aren't you getting paid $2 million to do this thing?
I mean, overall, I think it was a hella boring debate. Very, very forgettable. The most shit debate so far. I think the moderators were embarrassing in their questions. The questions were embarrassingly bad. And I think it's just an interesting comparison to just remember that America this is the only country in the world, American exceptionalism. This is the only country in the world that has these multi-billion-dollar dog and pony shows, presidential races. I mean, we were just in Canada, and we were reminded, because it was on the heels of Justin Trudeau winning re-election, and people that we were talking to, they're like, yeah, they campaigned for like 2 months. And then we have the election, and then we forget about it.
Right.
And we focus on other issues. And it's just so surreal to me that this is the way this country operates, is for years, literally 2 years in advance, spending billions of dollars, everything centered around this giant, the biggest reality show in the world.
Yeah, and I think there's some reasons why this one was a snooze fest, and why a lot of the debates have these kind of long periods where they're snooze fests. The ones that have been exciting have been predominantly boring, but there's some moments of excitement in there when someone gets to go off. But it's because the debates are partially for voters to see. But the debates mostly this is an audition to the ruling class for all of these candidates. This is them making their appeals to the big money interests, those that hold the centers of power, to the party insiders, the establishment. It's to kind of audition to them for their support and their funding, because that's how elections are won in this country, from political establishment and big money. So that's why so many of these questions about, there's questions about, will you as president tweet as much as Donald Trump tweets? Like shit like that. It's like, who cares? I mean, as we'll probably touch on a bunch, half this country lives paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
Like, nobody cares about this tweeting stuff, but it's like they put so many questions about Putin, so many questions about like civility, so many of these questions that are just focused on like the kind of behavior of Trump in terms of like, is he presidential and stuff like that. So many about impeachment, all this stuff. I mean, no one cares about these issues, but this is about auditioning for the political establishment to pick you. Just like Pete Buttigieg, one of these people. He went to a meeting with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, a Stop Bernie meeting, and they were like meeting with people, and they were auditioning, and they're like, all right, this guy can walk the walk and talk the talk, and we'll follow the establishment line. So let's pick him and put him up. And so I think you call it a dog and pony show, but part of a dog and pony show is like grooming and
masters,
training, right? And whatever for the master. And they're going out and doing it. So it's very literal.
My brother, Robbie Martin, Fluorescent Gray on Twitter, said something funny about Pete Buttigieg. He just said like, he looks like a child serial killer. and he really does. There's something about his face that just irks me so much. And his like bowl haircut, like the Dumb and Dumber haircut, just super creepy dude. Feels like he's constantly reading off some like auto prompter in his head. But let's start with the first question. You mentioned impeachment, and this kind of defined the entire debate, Mike, because they're obsessed with Trump, and that's all they can talk about. Because that's all that matters, right? Return to civility. Post-Trump America. How are we going to unite the masses, Mike? And this first question about impeachment, right out of the gate, Warren says, how would she convince her colleagues to vote for impeachment? And she said, read the Mueller report, which I found startling, considering that the Mueller report did not have any findings out of it that would lead to any convictions or impeachment proceedings for Donald Trump. In fact, it kind of absolved him of what they were accusing him of 2 years. Now, the Ukraine funding thing is a completely different story, but I found that odd that she said, I would tell them to read the Mueller report. Really? And then, of course, Bernie seeming slightly low energy at first, but then really coming back with great punches later on. But at first he was just like, look, we can chew and we can walk and chew gum at the same time. Like,
he's like, let's not be obsessed with this impeachment trial.
He was like, people are living paycheck to paycheck, just like you said. He's like, why are we obsessing about Trump? Like, sure, Trump is a criminal, but like people are dying in this country. It was just disgusting. The whole thing was just disgusting. Then, of course, everyone else was just awful and forgettable. Pete Buttigieg said something about how it's going to be a tender moment when Trump is gone. It's going to be very tender for Pete Buttigieg, and we all need to really kind of soften and figure out, what are we going to do when Trump is gone?
Carl Knight, thank you for the super chat donation, and I want to answer your question since you did that. Saying, if Bernie doesn't win the election, will you and I lead the revolution? We're doing our small part, I think. But Abby and I are both activists, and we both have been for more than a decade. And so I think that I don't think we're going to lead it, but we very much want to be a part of it and know that kind of political action is a solution. Even by virtue of doing this post-debate analysis, we're giving too much credence to the electoral system.
Right,
I mean,
right.
it's a sham system. It's a sham election. It's not what's needed to create change. But we know it's on people's minds. We know that these debates have been the most watched debates of any debates in American history. And so, I think it's easy to it's important to dissect them and read through the lines and show what we can really learn from them. And it reveals a bit too about the candidates that are important to the broader movement.
Yeah, no, I think there will be no savior in 2020, even if Bernie does win. The movement has to bring, the change, and that's going to be us in the streets like we always have been, and the millions of people who are fighting and shutting down the system like we need to do. And Mike, I think that, for the last 15 years, we've been greatly uninspired by the electoral process. I know that since the Bush administration, we've been pretty disillusioned and disenchanted. I certainly have been. I mean, I call it a two-party dictatorship, and I've always voted third party unabashedly, and I've never regretted that choice. And I feel like vote shaming is reprehensible. I think this is the first time I've been semi-inspired by the fact that there's millions of people who are rejecting capitalism, calling out, the change to our foreign policy consensus and stuff like that, calling for, workers' rights and things like that. And I want to be in the streets with those millions of people. And that's why we're kind of taking these elections a little bit more seriously, because it's an interesting time. And I feel like we can really pivot and be, riding the wave of where I think the country can go.
Yeah. Trish Roberts sent a donation too.
Thanks, Trish. We love you.
We love your show, Live Vegan. So yeah, and I think getting back to kind of the main point of this whole thing is, I think that impeachment question is another thing that's about them auditioning to the party establishment, because I think that most, MSNBC, CNN, they're covering the, other mass media, they're covering the impeachment like 24/7.
24/7.
I haven't had on cable news since it started. And because I haven't had on cable news, I have no fucking idea what's going on with it. I didn't even realize it was happening. It's just kind of like a blip. So I feel like most working class people who don't have MSNBC on during the day, they don't even realize this thing is going on. And I think it's also like Russiagate was, it's just a setup for a massive disappointment, because an impeachment, the hearings is meant to embarrass Trump, right? And they know they can do that. But for him to actually be impeached, they need the Republican Party to go along with it. And as you've seen from the hearings, apparently they're not backing down on defending Trump. And why would they? I mean, it's a Trump party now. And so it's like they want to make, there's so many questions are about impeachment, and so much of the conversation was steered towards impeachment. And candidate responses, even when they weren't asked about impeachment, started talking about impeachment. It's why we have to impeach. That's why it was refreshing to hear Bernie say, fine, if you want to impeach, but like, why does this have to be the central issue, especially when it's like all odds are against it working?
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that he's going to be forcibly ejected from office. Look at Clinton. I mean, it doesn't, even if he is found culpable of the crimes that he's being alleged to have committed, it doesn't mean that he's going to be removed from office. So I think that this is kind of all really a dream. And again, it's just a giant distraction from what we need to be focusing on. Mike, let's talk really quickly about Warren. She dominated a lot of the debate. A lot of questions were thrown consecutively at her.
And
I wanted
no hard
to talk
ones.
about the first one. Yeah, of course.
Which is interesting. Sorry, but no one got hard questions except for like the outliers, right? Yeah. Bernie, Tulsi, Yang. They gave them hard questions, but like Buttigieg, Biden, I thought he was going to be a hard question when they asked the only question about Me Too. They're like, Biden, there's the Me Too movement. I was like, oh, this is a tough question for Biden. And then they like ask about what needs to be done about it. And Biden just goes off and starts talking about domestic violence, which is not the
Did you hear
topic
what he
of
said
Me
though?
Too.
He said we need to keep punching. We need to keep punching.
Right, but not punching women. And he was
not
like, he was
punching
very weird.
women, but just punching.
And we have to get men involved. It was very weird. But anyways, that was like the only tough question in one of the front runners. So go ahead, because it's interesting that Warren, Buttigieg, Biden got no difficult questions.
Yeah, so before Gabbard or Yang were asked anything at all, Warren was asked another question about her like wealth tax. This big structural Bailey with the 2 pennies on his chest, this giant inflatable dog float. And you see this kind of manufactured, propped up like things at her campaign rallies and stuff like that of people wearing pennies, pennies on their chest, penny ears, like Mickey Mouse ears. Very, very strange. Mike, I don't really understand what she's talking about. She keeps saying, first of all, she says if you make $999 million, you won't be taxed for the healthcare thing. She says only if you make $1 billion. That's strange to me. But really, she keeps saying, it's capped at your first 50. Your first 50 billion is free. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Your first 50 billion
So
is free.
you don't get taxed 2 cents on a dollar until you make over 50 million. So she's like, if you make up to
50 million or 50 billion?
50 million. She said billion.
Okay.
But she was screwing up.
I was gonna
but
say, Jesus
still, yeah,
Christ.
right. No, that's kind of crazy. But yeah, no. So she's basically like, if you make under $50 million, you're fine. Don't worry about my tax policy. Which I don't know anyone who is in that bracket of tens of millions of dollars. Maybe she does. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it was really, really weird.
By the way, quick super chat from A. Mares that I wanted to share. I'm from Iowa, and it's very hard living there because all the campaigning, but no one likes Buttigieg. Don't believe MSM lies. Well, thank you, Iowan, for the insight. Very important.
Because the polls are very demoralizing. Every time I look at it, I'm like, how is this happening? And I guess there's one thing that we should know from 2016. It's don't trust polling.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Booker fights Warren from the right on the wealth tax.
Yeah.
He was like,
No,
you know,
like,
this
let's
doesn't
not
make
tax-
sense. He's like, let's not tax the rich.
Let's do a state tax instead. You know, so when people are buying like, you know, their third and fourth mansions, they get taxed on it or something.
Weird
like,
flex, bro.
Yeah, weird flex.
Weird flex,
I didn't really
bro.
get that. Booker seemed to be like, it was hard to figure out what he was politically, you know, because he
all
would
over
like
the
come
place.
at, he really only went after Warren, and he went at it from like, well, actually, he'd be like, well, I'm for that too, but we got to do it this. He'd be like, I'm for taxing the rich, I'm for childcare, whatever, but we got to do it like another way. And it was like, well, what are you talking about?
Right.
It was kind of, you know,
Yeah,
Drew's a nice guy, but I didn't really get what he was. He didn't really make an impression in terms of like, what is he about?
Yeah, you know, a lot of people do that. I feel like a lot of people who just kind of use rhetoric by anecdote, they don't actually have plans that they can combat other candidates with. So he'll be like, oh yeah, I totally agree with everything you're saying, but not that plan. It's like, well, do you have your own proposal? Because you seem like you're just blowing in the wind. And attaching yourself to what sounds really good, but you actually have nothing concrete to back it up. And that's kind of Cory Booker to a T, I feel like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We got a couple super chats about Palestine, which we're going to get to, of course, in a moment.
Yep.
Quick answer to Soap Opera's question. A good book about Israel's relationship with the United States. A great book is called Palestine, Israel, and the U.S. Empire by Richard Becker.
And also anything from Ilan Pappé.
Yeah, Ilan Pappé is great too. But yeah, that book we used a lot in our film, Gaza Fights for Freedom, for research and everything. But, you know, let's get on. Did you have another thing you wanted to get to with the debate, or are we on to the healthcare yet?
Oh, yeah, no, I was going to say we should get on to Medicare for All,
Yeah.
which is really strange how evasive the moderators were about potentially the most contentious and crucial issue, considering that all the contenders have disingenuously proposed alternative plans, yet kind of pretended like they're all for Medicare for All.
It was like 3 minutes on this topic, which is interesting because debates are supposed to be like debates between people, right? All of the reason it was such a boring debate too is because there was no real confrontation with anyone, because they weren't like asking questions of, in past debates on other networks, they were like, this person's plan says this, your plan says that. Why is your plan better than this person's plan? That didn't happen in this debate at all. But healthcare, I was like, okay, this is the number one issue for Americans. Pete Buttigieg has been going hard against Warren against Medicare for All. The last debate, it like threw Warren's campaign into chaos because people came after her for healthcare. So Warren releases a brand new Medicare for All plan because of that pressure. Buttigieg had made a name for himself and has taken out ads going against Warren's healthcare plan. Biden's like the one arguing like, oh, we have to be Obamacare, my thing's Obamacare. And then Bernie is like, this is his like life struggle, this thing. And like he has set the tone for all of the other candidates' positions are all modifiers of it. Medicare for all with this, Medicare for all plus, Medicare for all choice, And then they get to the healthcare question, right? And it's framed in a hostile way. So the way that they open up healthcare, they give a question to Bernie. First of all, Warren gets to open up about healthcare and talk about her Medicare for all, how she's for Medicare for all, which we can talk about now if you'd like, but which he's not. But then they're like, okay, now that we're on healthcare, we're going to go to healthcare. So they ask Bernie the question about healthcare. And they say to Bernie, President Barack Obama, who everybody, of course, loves and is a hero to the Democratic Party, he says that we shouldn't tear down the system and tear down the Affordable Care Act and all this stuff for healthcare. Do you think President Obama is wrong? And that was a question to Sanders on healthcare. Do you think Obama is wrong? So really just going for a soundbite to say, oh, Bernie says it. So the headline is Bernie Sanders says President Obama is wrong. That's what they were really going for with it. He, of course, handled it well, as you did. All of those questions to Bernie were framed like that. It was framed in a way a yes or no on a controversial thing, so then they could have the headline be, oh, Bernie says he'll negotiate with the Taliban. Bernie says Obama doesn't know what he's talking about. But the interesting thing is, Warren got to say her piece on healthcare without being asked. Bernie says something on it. Biden says a quick thing on healthcare that makes, he was falling asleep. So it was like, what did he even say? And then that's it. They cut it off. Buttigieg didn't respond. Warren didn't respond. None of the other candidates responded. It was just like, let's get away from healthcare, because they know it can only hurt everyone but Bernie. If Warren has to define her plan as, the only good thing, it was Buttigieg pointed out, he's like, whether you want to go to the plan on day one like Bernie or go to the plan in 3 years like Warren, they're both bad plans. It was like, okay, at least someone said Warren's plan is like, bizarre and dishonest.
I'm surprised he didn't say she adopted my plan. He didn't even want to go there.
Right. Yeah, the choice.
Yeah, the Medicare choice.
But what do you think about it being just like avoided? So
it's ridiculous because they didn't want to show and reveal how Warren has just completely, approached this in such a convoluted manner. Not only the payment structure, which is just ridiculous, this regressive head tax, but also coming back and being like, no, we're going to expand ACA for the first 3 years, waste all my political capital expanding the Affordable Care Act, and then on my 3rd year as the president, then we're going to pass Medicare for all over 50. So Medicare for all over 50. And then when she wins re-election, Mike, that's when she's going to push Medicare for all for everyone. Very interesting campaign strategy that will literally never work.
Well, it's interesting. That's part of the frustration about her not being pressed on her healthcare plan at all in this debate by the candidates or by the moderators, because she's been through 3 debates saying she has Bernie's Medicare for all plan.
Yeah, raising her hand, being like, I'm going to abolish private health insurance industry.
Right. So she's just been able to hide behind Bernie. When healthcare was a huge contentious issue at the debates and given the attention it deserves, Warren just hid behind Bernie being like, yeah, I'm for Bernie's plan. And then when she gets actually challenged directly, she's like, you know what, I'm actually not for Bernie's plan, I'm for this other plan. But then she literally didn't have to explain it at all. And she just gave her, rhetoric
generic,
about what it means about first 3, but it's like she didn't get challenged on how horrible of a plan that actually is. And it's been completely, thoroughly ripped apart by Bernie supporters, not by Bernie supporters, by everyone has really ripped her plan apart, from its regressive taxes. That is terrible. The way it gives a kind of an opening for corporations to get out of by just making all their workers independent contractors, so then they don't have to pay into this thing. The big, huge differences in it, the fact that the annual cap on the co-pays and deductible, even if she gets to her Medicare for all plan, that's the thing. So she's for this 3-year transition where she wages this political battle to bring back the Affordable Care Act, have a public option, but have private insurance still exist and still be blood-sucking, and disable the public option because not as many people are paying it. The point of a public option is if there's a single payer, there's one system that everyone pays into, and then it's great for everyone. But having this multifaceted system, and then at the end of her 3rd year, she's going to lower Medicare for all to age 50 and then start campaigning for Medicare for all. Well, the 4th year of her presidency, at the end of her 3rd year, she's starting to campaign for re-election. And so, of course, she's not going to pass Medicare for all in her 4th year. She's going to start running on Medicare for all for re-election. So she's promising Medicare for all in her 2nd term. But even if we get her Medicare for all plan after her transition, which is a very bad transition, even if we get to her Medicare for all plan, it's horribly funded through a regressive tax and gives tons of loopholes for corporation, but also the co-pays and deductibles are at a much higher cap than Bernie's Medicare for all plan, and also doesn't factor in a medical debt. Bernie Sanders says he's going to forgive all medical debt.
Why is Bernie not saying this on the stage? This is what really bothers me. Bernie is not going hard enough. He needs to, how she always is like, I'm the only candidate who does this. I'm the only candidate who does that. Yeah. Bernie needs to be like, I'm the only candidate calling to abolish all medical debt. I'm the only candidate calling to abolish all student debt.
Right.
That is a very important distinction that I do not understand why he's not doing. And it's harming him greatly.
Yeah. I mean, he needs to, because it's, this is like life or death battle shit.
Yeah.
And, I understand the strategy of just being kind of civil to everyone except Biden for attacking him on the war. But yeah, I mean, it's confusing to people because she's allowed to say this stuff and make it seem like she has these positions when she really doesn't. Want to read a couple of super chats real quick.
Yeah.
Leftist Trucker Praxis, my guy, thanks for the donation, says, not a huge Tulsi fan, but the first time I've heard from a Dem candidate openly say people are more important than the party. I'd agree with you there.
I wanted to go off on that. I mean, Gabbard killed it in the first question given to her. I was just like, boom, you fucking slayed that. I mean, she really killed it right out of the gate. About the Hillary Clinton thing, I mean, it was amazing because, again, of course, the moderators try to pitch the most inflammatory thing to Tulsi. You know, right out of the gate, they're like, you tweeted that Hillary Clinton's a warmonger. Like, la, 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 la. And it's like, yeah, she is. And Tulsi was just like very clear about that. She was like, yeah. And I think that what she said really well was that she didn't end with Hillary. She included Trump in this kind of foreign policy consensus and doctrine that perpetuates these endless wars. So I appreciated that she said the Bush-Hillary Trump doctrine. That was very important. And that was a very, very smart measure. Of course, it didn't stop all of these people from freaking the fuck out and being like, oh my God, she's criticizing the Democratic Party. I mean, the Democratic Party is corrupt as hell. All of these people should be criticizing the Democratic Party because it's completely failed us. It's bankrupt. And that's why we have Donald Trump. So yeah, I think you absolutely should be criticizing the Democratic Party. Here's what I felt like could have been said there is we could have called out the Bolivia coup in the whole answer about the U.S. overthrowing dictators and, you know, and trying to do this regime change around the world. I would have appreciated something about, hey, this includes the latest CIA-backed coup in Bolivia that unfortunately we're still waiting for her response on. I really hope that she gives a statement soon because we need all of these strength and unity that we can from the political contenders to really provide pressure on the establishment for supporting this criminal coup that we're seeing a lot of fascist violence being carried out and, you know, basically with our support.
Yeah. Carl, thanks for the donation. I agree. Pete did do a good job on that question about experience. You know, he had definitely rehearsed that one. Interesting question here for you, Abby, from Roy Vasquez asking, do you like the band KMFDM? Please tell us whether or not you do.
Yeah, of course. KMFDM, I don't know if you know this, but KMFDM actually used me in one of their albums, Hell Yeah. I actually do a whole track where I recite a little poem that I wrote specifically for KMFDM. Sasha's amazing. We're friends. So definitely check out the album Hell Yeah and check out my track on it about why we fight. So check that out.
Yeah. Giovanni, thanks for the donation. I want to read his comment because it's good. Buttigieg's smug response to Tulsi. Do you really think anyone on the stage supports invading Mexico? Was peak irony coming from a huge advocate for the war on terror and war on drugs. I agree with you, Giovanni. All right, as we go, the last thing I want to say about Tulsi, because, you know, I agree this was, you know, definitely her best debate showing, which I think she really needed. And I think that the reason it was successful too is because she's obviously changed her framing a little bit. Before, she was very focused on just saying regime change war and kind of being appreciated for using the term anti-regime change war on the stage. Last debate, she maybe went a little too hard and used the phrase like 9 times in a single answer, which of course is still great to hear that term being used, but it almost seems like she had kind of lost footing on everything and just like going to the thing that she has been applauded for. But in this one, she really very obviously tried to frame herself as, I am the candidate. And this is going back to one of the super chat questions that I appreciated about saying you're not a fan of Tulsi. Neither are we, but appreciated what she said about the party being for the people. She's obviously kind of changing her candidacy to be kind of confronting the DNC specifically by being like, the DNC is a corrupt establishment, you know, rich people's political insider organization, and the party needs to be for the people. And I think that's something that resonates with people. That's obviously what like kneecapped Hillary Clinton throughout her entire campaign, was the understanding that there's this kind of seek the party's run by like a shadow insider party leadership. So I think that was smart.
Well, and also Kamala Harris tried to, you know, get back at her and be like, okay, you criticized Obama on Fox News. And then unfortunately she ended her critique of Tulsi by saying, and you sit down with dictators like Bashar al-Assad. Tulsi's response to that was another slam dunk.
Yeah.
Another slam dunk. And again, she said this to Pete Buttigieg at the very end of the debate too. She was like, yeah, I'm going to lead diplomacy. And yes, I will sit down with people, anyone, to secure our national security. And I think that that was really important. And it really shows how ridiculous these people are. I mean, why would you not sit down with the leader of North Korea? Why would you not sit down with Bashar al-Assad? Why would you not talk to Putin? Is it better to just ridicule these people and paint them as cartoonishly evil? No, I'd rather actually understand and have diplomatic relations and have, you know, communications with these people and hear them speak and hear what they have to say. And I really appreciated that she didn't back down on that. She didn't say, yeah, he's a dictator, but she really was strong on that answer, and I appreciated her response.
Yeah, I mean, the one Kamala did kind of get her a little bit in talking about how, you talk about wanting to lead the Democratic Party, yet during Obama's administration, you were on Fox News full time attacking President Obama. I think it's definitely good to attack President Obama for his foreign policy. We did that throughout all of Obama's tenure. But she did kind of call out something that was real, because Tulsi wasn't attacking his foreign policy from an anti-war position. I think it was the opposite. I mean, and key things was she was frequently in the media attacking Obama for not using the word radical Islamic terrorism, when Obama had given a decree to the party saying, don't use the term radical Islamic terrorism. Tulsi, of course, was the kind of leader, the only one in the Democratic Party who was saying, you have to call our enemy for what it is, radical Islamic terror, which I disagree with doing that. Attacking Obama from the right on the Ukraine stuff, when the right-wing Nazi coup was happening in Ukraine, which was an anti-Russia action. Of course, Tulsi gets pegged as being like a Putin puppet. I think that's disproven completely by the fact that she was attacking Obama for not sending more funding and arms to the Nazi insurgency in Ukraine, this anti-Russia front, and the Iran nuclear deal, attacking Obama for signing this nuclear deal, which wasn't strong enough on Iran. So, I think that Kamala did kind of find a weak spot there, and in particular, her talks with Bannon about a position in the Trump White House, which this meeting happened. So, Kamala's reprehensible, but did find a weak spot for Tulsi, when Tulsi's thing is foreign policy.
And let's move on to the issue of qualifications for the presidency. So, Klobuchar, yes, it is true. We love Julian Casablancas. He's amazing. He's a good friend of Lee Camp's, and we love him. He's a dope supporter of the alternative media movement. So check out The Voids, which is his alternate band.
The Voids with a Z.
Yeah, really cool ass dude. So Klobuchar, what the fuck is wrong with this woman? Why was she shaking so much? At first I was just like, oh, poor thing. She just has the shake. She's very nervous. Literally could not stop shaking the entire time, Mike, including, I feel bad saying that, but it's true. It was just really kind of off.
Yeah, how are you going to do against Trump on a debate stage?
Yeah, another thing that this reminded me of is how good Trump is at debating. Remember this. Remember how off the wall this dude was, how much he just killed Hillary in these debates. And I kept thinking about that. Like, what if Trump were on this debate stage right now? Would he absolutely crush every single contender, just like he did the 17 Republican contenders back in 2016? What would he do? And it kind of worried me a little bit, because I don't know. Even him against Bernie, I feel like is going to be a tough one, because Trump plays really dirty, and he is very, very good because he knows how to make good television. Yeah. He's a TV guy.
Well, we know how he's going to go off against all of them. Just want to read Dustin, thank you for the donation. Yes, we agree that we should have been moderating the debate along with Jimmy Dore. That would have been amazing. We love Jimmy, and we love working with him when we can. Thomas, thank you for the donation. Also, appreciate my insights. Oh, Fanson's breaking the set.
No way. Thank you so much.
Come a long way.
I appreciate you.
Eric Nelson, thank you so much for your donation, man.
That is
really
amazing.
Appreciate it.
Eric, you're the best.
Hit us up so we can thank you personally.
Yeah, thank you, dude. But did you hear Klobuchar's remark also when she was just like, I've raised $17,000 from ex-boyfriends?
Yeah, what was that about? And she made a joke about how the number is not growing, meaning I'm not still accumulating ex-boyfriends. But
Mike, we need a woman to be president and if you just want to see a woman beat Trump, you look at how Nancy Pelosi beats him every single day. Slam dunk, dude.
I think her reasoning for that was she seems so inhuman, very plastic, puppet type person, that she's like, I have had relationships.
Right. I have sex.
I've had sex with more people than my husband.
And they give me money. We're still
it was
friends.
To try to humanize herself. But yikes.
We get it, Amy.
That was a big yikes.
Yang, look, you have to appreciate Yang just because he brings something new to the table. The whole AI thing and automation of jobs absolutely is a huge threat. I would say one of the biggest threats, like he said. I really appreciate that he's bringing that, because he's bringing the awareness to how jobs will be lost. And no, you can't just come with these empty platitudes being like, we're going to give you jobs here and there. No, tens of thousands of jobs will be gone with automation. And Yang is really the only one talking about that. I completely appreciate that he did that. How crazy, though, was the question framed to him how would you respond to a terrorist attack? I mean, I
Yeah.
feel like this was one of the first questions toward him, saying, you know, you have no political or military experience, so
Right.
how would you do this? As
Yeah.
if our leaders have really conducted themselves well in response to terrorism.
Yeah, George Bush did a great
Ever?
job responding to a terrorist attack.
Yeah, really amazing job, guys. Just so gross.
Yeah. I mean, Yang, I severely disagree with on a great number of things. You know, in particular, he's against raising the minimum wage.
He's against a wealth tax as well.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that, you know, he's not a progressive, but I mean, I think the reason people like him is because he's bringing, you know, he actually can talk about issues that affect working people, and that's what other people don't.
Right.
Even though the UBI, whatever its problems are in the larger scheme of things in terms of what he's for, in terms of real social services, social safety net, things like that, you know, it speaks to a real need. And even him talking about like social alienation, you know, I thought was important. I mean, in talking about mass shooters and stuff like that, like I thought it was, you know, pretty interesting that he said there's a lot of young men who are just, we have a society that alienates and isolates you, and it's pretty easy to end up fucked up from it. And so, I mean, that's the thing that I think Bernie did a good job talking about on the Joe Rogan show, about how in terms of solving drug addiction and all of these things, it's about despair, diseases of despair. Why are we have a country that is in such high rates of despair, such high rates of suicide, such high rates of drug abuse? It's because our fucking communities are falling apart. There's no hope for a future. And we have an actual culture that has itemized and individualized everyone to the point where you can like literally like not have social interactions with friends or colleagues or family and completely close yourself off. And that's he's right, that's a lot of these mass shooter types. They're radicalized, they're racist, they're anti-trans, anti-women people, but it also comes from a severe social alienation that, you know, this kind of thing wouldn't happen in such high numbers if there was such a thing as community in our society.
And I think another big problem is the individualization of our struggles as well. I mean, that's where identity politics plays a role. I think the collectivizing our struggle and our fight is super important. Andrew Yang hits home on that. But the thing about Andrew Yang is that he always comes back to the freedom dividend. He always comes back to the UBI. And I think that's a problem because obviously that's a Band-Aid. That is a Band-Aid on what is a much deeper structural problem, something that's systemic that needs to be completely overhauled. And I think that just throwing $1,000 a month at everyone is absolutely not the solution. So it's unfortunate. I mean, I definitely agree with UBI, but I think that needs to happen in addition to a ton of other changes and a large confrontation to capitalism, which Andrew Yang is not willing to do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like, you know, I think there's Yang supporters, we can build with them. You know what I mean? We don't like Yang. And I'm not a fan of Yang, but I'm a fan of Yang, a lot of Yang supporters. And I think that we can like, you know, we should come together after the election and try to like fight for some of these things that the good sides of his policy. Question from Mark Ayala in the super chat, if we can. He says, if Sanders comes out with a lead in upcoming voting states, will Dems and the media shun him completely? Or will Dems have the still blue no matter who mentality? What do you think, Abby?
I think that we're never going to see polls coming with Bernie on top. I think that they're completely skewed against him. I do think that he has a much more powerful ground game than any other candidate. I don't think that we're going to see that reflected in the polls on purpose. There's a purposeful misdirection from the corporate media and establishment figures that are going to pretend like Bernie is not doing as well as he is to basically keep us disillusioned and feel like we're disempowered and not really feel like it's worth it.
Yeah, and honestly, they're preparing for that, the Bernie camp. I mean, we attended a Bernie event, a Bernie Barnstorm, where the campaign people were talking about their strategy for winning the election. And they were very open about the fact, saying the DNC is going to prevent us from getting the nomination, even if we win the nomination. We're well aware of that, and we're already taking measures to prevent that. So the Bernie campaign itself acknowledges that there is an effort from the Democratic Party establishment to prevent him from being the nominee, even if he wins the necessary number of delegates and the necessary number of states to be the nominee. And so I think if he became the nominee, if there was no way to stop him and he became the nominee, I think you would see the Democratic Party turn its back on him, because the ruling class would rather have Trump than Bernie. And honestly, the Democratic Party establishment would rather have Trump than Bernie, because Bernie will fundamentally change the trajectory of the party from there on out. So yeah.
Let's get to the peak of the debate. I thought when I finally wasn't asleep and feeling like I didn't actually want to do this live stream because I was so shocked at how terrible the debate was.
It felt like Joe Biden.
Yeah, I really felt like Joe Biden. My brain was melting. But Bernie gets asked a question about Afghanistan, which I found really refreshing because, typically we hear Buttigieg be asked about his experience in Afghanistan, posing with those assault rifles and being like, these assault rifles belong on the streets of Afghanistan, not in our towns and cities. So it was really incredible to see Bernie just point blank asked, would you negotiate with the Taliban? Would you bring the troops home? Of course, another question geared to trap him, be like, well, I wouldn't, would you negotiate with terrorists, essentially? And he said, absolutely, I would negotiate with the Taliban. Here's what else he said that I really appreciated. First, he said, of course, he voted against the Gulf War and the Iraq War. He did vote for the AUMF, which I find slightly disheartening. But what I find really interesting is that he actually brought up the need to change the framework of the entire war on terror paradigm, to really challenge this paradigm of the war on terror, which basically was authorized by the AUMF. Drone strikes everywhere, special operations, anywhere, anyone you can deem a terrorist, and you can just extrajudicially take them out and conduct special operations to conduct these raids anywhere in the world. Of course, that's what Obama expanded off of Bush's war on terror. So I found that really amazing. I haven't really heard any candidate take on that language that, wait, we need to actually confront what the entire war on terror is all about. That was really, really cool. And of course, he said, yes, we absolutely should bring our troops home, and called out the military budget. This is a person who's voted against every single one of Trump's military budget increases.
Which Warren hasn't. The other,
of course Warren hasn't.
Person who's just like Bernie voted for Trump's military
Her foreign
budget.
policy is absolute trash. And Sanders said, yeah, we shouldn't be spending more on our military than the next 10 countries combined. Yeah. So it was really great to hear someone just hit it out of the park. Just lay it all down. I was just like, boom, boom, boom. This is exactly what I want to hear. This is exactly what we need to hear. Unfortunately, they did not go to Gabbard and ask her about Afghanistan, which I found was a missed opportunity. And they just went right on to the next issue after Bernie slayed that one.
You're right. Thanks, Alan Fex and Balthazar, for your comments and donation. Much appreciated. And Nick Mann, thank you, man. Love and solidarity from Chicago. What issues you'd like to highlight if y'all were hosting the debate? We'll get to that in a second, Nick. That is a great question. But I just wanted to kind of wrap up the discussion about Bernie's foreign policy answer on Afghanistan. First of all, I mean, I think that he really, Tulsi branded has won this brand as the anti-war candidate. And in fact, that's her justification for running when Bernie, who she was like a surrogate for and campaigned for in 2016, is running. Bernie, I think, made pretty clear that he is an anti-war candidate, if not the anti-war candidate, with that position. In fact, in a way, outflanked Tulsi on the anti-war issue because he said to fundamentally question the war on terror, that's not a regime change war. That's a drone strikes, special operations, all these things that every candidate on that stage is a very much supports. Bernie said we need to rethink that. And you're right to say that was kind of shocking thing to hear from a Democratic Party candidate. The war on terror needs to end. Absolutely. And he's the only person that's gotten anywhere close to that. Go ahead.
If I were a moderator at the debate, I would have followed up and said, what do you mean challenge the war on terror paradigm? What does that mean? Does that mean ending drone strikes? Does that mean scaling back and repealing the AUMF? That's exactly what I would have followed up to ask. Unfortunately, that was a largely missed opportunity, and I fear that we won't ever hear that addressed again unless he, of course, brings it up himself. Mm-hmm. Fundamental problem with our political establishment.
Yeah, and honestly, that was yet another question to Bernie. Would you negotiate with the Taliban? Because it doesn't matter how good of an answer he gives, the headline will be Bernie will negotiate with the Taliban. So it was all crafted to get that news bulletin, Bernie will negotiate with terrorists. That's what they were going for. But I think it was very important that Bernie said he would negotiate with the Taliban. Now, Trump supposedly has said he'd negotiate with the Taliban. That has been a complete fucking sham. We could have been out of Afghanistan when Obama was. We could have been. I mean, it's, the best plan.
18 years.
The only difficulty in getting out of Afghanistan is how do you logistically get that many people out within a week's time? That's possible, and I think that's the only challenge that any president has to worry about is who's going to drive the trucks, who's going to fly the planes, to get every motherfucker and every piece of equipment out this week. So we don't have, because people just, as the debate moderator pointed out, which was good, that more U.S. soldiers just died in Afghanistan. And of course, this is like the highest year on record for civilian casualties caused by the United States. And so for Bernie to except that he was going to get this really negative news bulletin. Bernie Sanders will negotiate with terrorists. Here's the reality about the Afghanistan war that no one else on that debate stage would acknowledge, that no one in the Pentagon acknowledges, that nobody in the political establishment or the media acknowledges, is that the Afghanistan war is a lost war. The Taliban won the war against the United States. They control the vast majority of the country. Every attempt, even the massive troop surge by Barack Obama, where he sent 150,000 combat soldiers to rush all of the strongholds of the Taliban, they got defeated. And now they've retreated back into their little bases. There is no beating the Taliban. So if you say that you will not negotiate with the Taliban to get out, which the Taliban has actually been pretty kind of open with saying, yeah, we'll negotiate and we'll even let you keep soldiers here as long as you like stop doing these certain things. Like they've actually offered up some pretty big concessions. If you do not say that you will negotiate with the Taliban, that means that you want the United States to just kill and die endlessly in Afghanistan, endlessly. Because if your precondition is defeating the Taliban, that's not going to happen. Nobody acknowledges that that's even a minute possibility that could happen. So everyone else who says, yes, we should leave Afghanistan after we've met certain benchmarks, like Buttigieg has said, and pretty much everyone else, those benchmarks are impossible benchmarks. The benchmark is Taliban having no influence. It's just a reality, and they've won militarily. And so it was important for him to say that because I think that he was the only one on that stage who would, I mean, maybe Tulsi too, but the only kind of recognition of that fact that the war is lost and it's a matter of saving as many civilian and soldiers' lives as possible by just getting out as fast as possible.
And so what is it? Just complete hubris of why we're still there because we don't want to admit defeat?
I mean, honestly, you hit the nail on the head. It's not wanting to admit defeat. I mean, the Vietnam War, the generals and Washington knew the Vietnam War was lost for years before they finally left. And they adopted a strategy. They knew eventually they were going to have to leave. They knew eventually they were going to have to admit defeat, but they didn't want to tarnish the image of the invincible empire. And so thousands more U.S. soldiers and millions more people in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos died as a part of a slow motion retreat. And so what the U.S. has been engaged in for about the past 10 years in Afghanistan, once the offensive of the Obama troop surge ended, has been a retreat, but in very slow motion, where record numbers of people are dying and soldiers are coming home mangled and coffins also, because none of them want to take responsibility, and they know they can kick the can down the road for the next administration or next Pentagon general to take up.
Disgusting. 19 years. It's an abomination. And yeah, of course, it also has something to do with resources, I'm sure. Oil, opium. We know that a lot of opium is coming out of Afghanistan. Actually, the majority of the world's opium is coming out of Afghanistan. So I'm sure pharmaceutical companies are profiting off that. We have a question from Eric saying, if Tulsi is against U.S. regime change, why hasn't she condemned U.S. regime change in Bolivia? This is an amazing question. I addressed this earlier. I am still waiting with bated breath a week and a half after this coup was initiated for Tulsi's statement. She was confronted by a channel called Convo Couch after one of her talks here in LA, and she said she has to look into it. She's looking into the facts. To me, it's very clear cut. The facts are out. They were out within 24 hours that it was a clear U.S.-backed coup. You have everything from Carlos Meza, incubated from a DC think tank. You have audio leaks from opposition figures working with prominent U.S. senators talking about how they are going to stage this coup out of the U.S. embassy in Bolivia, burn down polling centers. If Evo Morales won democratically, they would then contest the elections and carry out this paramilitary operation, transition, as they say. That's been exposed. 6 confirmed graduates from the School of Americas, which is based here in Fort Benning, Georgia, have been confirmed to be leading the coup. So the facts are out. The facts are out. We know Trump has initiated this kind of troika of tyranny, new confrontation with all socialist countries in Latin America, and this is the next step. Venezuela was extremely obvious, and she was good on that. So I'm very confused about where her statement is. We need people like her supporting this. So far, Bernie is the only person who has come out with an unequivocal condemnation, saying, first of all, let's call a spade a spade. This is a fucking coup. And then also
a lot of pressure from, who's that guy?
Jorge Ramos, who's a total shill. I mean, he's a total shill. Everyone was sympathetic with him because he had this big, fake confrontation with Trump.
He's a CNN guy?
He's like a Univision or something like that. But then he did the fake sit-down interview with Maduro and pretended that Maduro stole his footage. Like that was completely concocted. It was all staged. He showed Maduro this footage of people eating out of the trash outside of the Venezuelan presidential palace, which was also like a stage thing, according to Gloria La Riva. So all of it was just like very sketchy. I don't trust this dude as far as I can throw him. I don't know why he's so intimately involved. Well, of course, that's why he's so involved with like posing these questions and to people like Bernie Sanders coming from the right wing on all of these Latin American issues. But yeah, he confronted Bernie Sanders and he was like, you called it a coup and da-da-da. And Bernie was like, yeah, it's a coup. Mm-hmm. It's a coup. And he's also said Evo Morales did a lot of great things to lift up indigenous and poor people in Bolivia. That was very important to hear. We need to keep pushing Tulsi from the left. I find it odd that people are kind of bending over backwards to absolve and excuse her absence and silence, this glaring silence from the so-called regime change candidate on Bolivia. It's time that we step up and push all of these candidates from the left. It doesn't matter who they are, but we need their responses, especially if they're especially if they're basically positing themselves as the foreign policy candidate. This is a clear-cut case of U.S.-led regime change. We need to stand unequivocally with our brothers and sisters in Bolivia and condemn this.
Absolutely. Do you think it would be a question and regime change is bad even if no like American soldiers are there, right? I mean, there's so many ways the U.S. empire exerts its influence. It's deciding who should be in power, who shouldn't be in power. And it's not always with American troops.
This is a litmus test. This is a litmus test because Latin America is under attack. And this is a big litmus test for Tulsi Gabbard. I think it says a lot that she hasn't said anything for the last week and a half on this, unfortunately.
Right. And keeping on foreign policy, I think another way that everyone was outflanked on foreign policy by Bernie Sanders is, of course, the foreign policy stuff was kept very limited. They have the one thing on Afghanistan where they only asked Bernie, and it was just to get a soundbite of Bernie saying that he supported terrorists.
And the Khashoggi thing, which of course was like another anti-Trump angle.
Right, it was an anti-Trump angle that Trump hasn't done enough on with Khashoggi. But then Bernie takes that question about Saudi Arabia. Of course, surprisingly, he didn't mention that he led the anti-Yemen war stuff, the stopping funding of Saudi Arabia, which I thought he was going to after Biden or Booker, one of them, tried to like talk about that. But he all of a sudden brings up Palestine. And
out of the blue.
I mean, talk about like what he kind of said. I was kind of shocked by. He steered it. He brought it up because he knew they weren't going to ask it, and he knew that this was his only opportunity to raise the issue of Palestine. Normally, no candidate will say anything about it unless they're prompted.
Unless they're directly asked.
Unless they're confronted at a debate, at a town hall, in a media interview. They don't want to talk about it at all. They don't want to make it a thing because it's so controversial. But Bernie brought it up specifically. And in a way that I think, he's going to get shit for from the right, from the Democratic Party, and from the pro-Israel crowd, AIPAC and stuff like that.
It was. I mean, I thought it was really shocking and surprising, to say the least, the fact that he pivoted completely from a question about Saudi Arabia to just saying randomly, the U.S. can also not sit back and just be pro-Israel. And then he said, I am pro-Israel. And he said, but I know, no. Bernie, we all know that, come on. I guess it's asking too much to have a completely anti-Zionist Jewish candidate.
One state candidate.
Candidate. Hopefully that's coming soon. But to have a presidential candidate bring up Palestine unprompted is unheard of. I've never seen that before in any, in all of my lifetime. He said the U.S. cannot just sit back and be pro-Israel. He said we must treat the Palestinian people with dignity and respect, and of course brought up the horrific conditions, the horrific conditions in Gaza of unemployment, which I said that's
not sustainable. So like him bringing it up to then say, yeah, I'm pro-Israel, but no other candidate and no administration, Democrat or Republican, treats the Palestinians with respect, and it's not enough to have because that's the thing is like the reason other candidates don't talk about it is because it's just like a check the box thing. You swear your allegiance to Israel? Yes, I do. And that's kind of
you support a two-state solution? Yes, I do.
Right, and that's it. But he's saying that's not enough. You can't, or not. That's not enough. He's like that shouldn't just be the litmus test that you just say support Israel. You have to support Palestinians. So it's this kind of like, it's definitely not our position. It's playing. I think that he's too stuck in his old school way of having gone to Israel on like a socialist kibbutz back like in the 60s when there was actually a large like progressive, anti-racist kind of like socialist kind of segment of Israeli society. I mean, if you should probably go back and see that those kibbutzes are just quite racist and whatever. But I mean, I think his entire point of it was he was making a point in that debate to say Palestinians deserve respect and we can't keep treating this issue the way every other administration has, where they're just whatever Israel says goes. We need to be on the side of the Palestinians in an equal way that we're on the side of the Israelis, which I think is why so many Palestinians we know are like pro-Bernie.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was really surprising. I think that we need to keep pushing him from the left. As we mentioned before, 4 years ago, he was bad, relatively bad on Palestine, Israel. And I think this really shows how much mass movements can push people like Bernie Sanders, who are, relatively honest brokers on issues like this. And I think it really speaks a lot to the pressure that's mounting in this country, the change in political consciousness. It was pretty bizarre to see an unprompted, unscripted answer just randomly tossed in there about Palestinian human rights. I mean, I was pretty surprised and thrilled to see it.
And the unemployment rate, saying that it's unsustainable that 80% of young people are unemployed in Palestine. I mean, that was important. Address Scarlett, thank you for your donation. You say that was an episode of a reality show, not a presidential primary debate. We're so screwed. We agree. And thank you again, Balthazar, for another donation, asking, is there any way a candidate could rightfully connect supporting Israel with attaching its xenophobia, Islamophobia, war crimes, and bigotry to Judaism globally by claiming they represent all Jews? Good comment. And that is correct. And, Bernie could do that as the only Jewish candidate and the best one on Palestine. It would be cool.
It was interesting to see just on this foreign policy kick that we're on now, how Biden and Klobuchar were asked after you hear from Bernie, who just knocked it out of the park, and they're asked about foreign policy, and they're just like, Biden is just like, we need our foreign policy back like Obama did it. Like, that's his answer, is like, let's go back to the Obama era of foreign policy. And Klobuchar is just like, we need a different foreign policy in this country, essentially meaning the same thing. Mike, let's go back to how Obama did foreign policy, which was, again,
troop surge in Afghanistan.
The same kind of thing, right? The same exact thing, an expansionist policy of what
Libya
the Bush administration put into
change.
place. Yeah, Libya regime change, drone wars, drone king.
90% civilian casualty rate for drone strikes.
Yeah, really amazing foreign policy. Amy Klobuchar, shaky. So
shaky Klobuchar.
Shaky Klobuchar. I have $17,000 from people that I've had sex with in my campaign. The dumbest question ever tonight, I think, was to Yang again. What would you say on your first phone call to Putin, Mike?
Oh, good Lord.
I mean, it was just so dumb. It's
Yeah.
like, what a missed opportunity, dude.
You know what I thought was a funny question that they also asked? I mean, they asked this to Cory Booker. So a lot of the questions were about China, right? China's hurting American farmers. Trump's hurting farmers with the China. It's all about a lot of it is about, it's all fitting into the U.S. foreign policy Pentagon view that we're going to have to go to war with China because we cannot let another economic power in the world that can give loans to underdeveloped countries. There's only the World Bank and the IMF and U.S. banks. Like, we can't have someone else doing that kind of thing, loans with lower interest rates than ours. So a lot of it was geared towards China. And that's another example of this debate not being for American workers, not being for poor people, not being for working class people, not being for people with real problems in this country. There are questions for the establishment. There are questions for the military establishment, the military industrial complex, the Pentagon, and the big capitalists who throw all their money around in these elections. China is a big threat to them. China is a huge threat to the capitalists in America, a threat to their profits. And so why were three questions about the threat of China? China poses zero threat to us, right? China's not going to invade us. They're not going to bomb us, whatever. They pose absolutely no threat. They only pose a threat to profits of massive corporations.
Who said something about a nuclear-free China? Is that Biden?
Yeah, Biden said we need to make China a nuclear-free peninsula. I think maybe he was talking about Korea, but he was saying China needed to be a nuclear-free peninsula. So God. I don't know what. But I don't think he knew what he was talking about.
Let's address the Me Too movement by keep punching them. Keep punching women.
Well, but I think, keep. But they asked Booker, they're like, since it's so important, everyone agrees it's so important to confront China, do you think the U.S. should intervene to help the Hong Kong protests? That's what they asked Booker.
My
If
God.
the U.S. should intervene. And what does intervening to help the Hong Kong protests mean? Intervening to protect them from security forces? Intervening to help them get autonomy? That's like basically, that's a regime change war right there. I mean, you mean sending the American military to protect the protesters from police, which,
Meanwhile,
if I'm
people
not mistaken, have killed nobody and shot nobody with live ammunition.
Yeah, meanwhile, like 40 people have been shot dead by Bolivian paramilitary forces that are backed by the U.S. government.
But they straight up asked if the U.S. should come to their aid. Like, what do you mean come to their aid? Like, how can you come to the aid of China on Chinese soil? Like,
unbelievable.
it's like it's like asking, like, oh, should China come to the aid of Black Lives Matter protesters in Ferguson when they're being attacked by the police?
What did he say?
I think that would be cool, but that'd be like, oh shit, the Chinese army is here to like protect these protesters from getting smashed.
Yeah, but this isn't foreign interference, right? Should the U.S. aid the Hong Kong protesters? So
Yeah.
what was his response?
He wouldn't answer, and he just said, we need to check China and we need to check Putin. I don't know what he means by like check them. I don't know if that's a physical check or whatever, but that was.
You got to take him to the
answer.
woodshed, like Biden would say.
Yeah.
Got to take him back to the woodshed and beat him up.
Yeah.
One thing that's really interesting is the Hong Kong Democracy Act has just passed, I think, the House, like with almost a near unanimous vote, which is really crazy. Or
Ted
maybe it was the
Cruz
Senate.
and Marco Rubio, of course.
And this
leading
is
the
like another
charge.
kind of push for economic sanctions and economic, basically just suffocation of China and trade. And yeah, I mean, it's just so obvious what this is all being driven by.
Yeah.
You know, so it's just really, really cynical and disgusting.
Thomas of Tibber, thank you for your donation and your question. Should Israel exist, or can there be an effective two-state solution? We'll defer to the Palestinians, who are the ones being colonized. It's up to them. I think there's large segments of Palestinian society that would accept a two-state solution along just lines of the 1967 borders with equal rights for Palestinians and Israelis within the borders of what is known as Israel. But there's also a very powerful an argument for a one democratic state with equal rights for all, which doesn't mean everyone gets expelled who's not Palestinians, but just equal rights for all in a one democratic state where everyone has the right to vote and things like that.
Ending the siege, ending the occupation, having a proper democracy with full voting rights for the 5.5 million Palestinians who are denied and deprived rights, and you know, when their lives are completely controlled by Israel. But I agree with Mike. I mean, I've talked to Palestinians who have different opinions on what they want to see happen. A lot of them that I've talked to have said that they would accept the 1967 lines. A lot of them have said that they want a one-state solution. So it's up to us to listen to them and to follow suit, and that is supporting BDS and the solidarity movement with Palestine and whatever they're asking us to do.
Yeah, appreciate that. What else did you got down on your notes from the debate?
I mean,
tonight?
honestly, the foreign policy thing was the big end for me. There was a kind of a missed opportunity about the white supremacy question. And at the end, you know, Booker made that final dig about how he thought Biden was high for saying we shouldn't legalize marijuana. Of course, this is another just grandpa moment from Biden. I mean, good God, this is a guy who was on camera saying to burn down the buildings that are hosting raves.
Yeah,
a
the
decade and a half
Anti-Rave
ago.
Act was Joe Biden, huh?
This guy is such a piece of shit.
He
I
went
mean,
to
he
war
hates
on
fun.
rave. Talk about the war on drugs.
He
He's
hates
the war
fun.
on raves.
He wants no raves. He wants no drugs, no weed.
Yeah.
He just wants to be really creepy and incoherent. Vote for Biden 2020.
I think that was the one zinger of the night when Booker went after Biden for saying he doesn't want to legalize weed. And he's like, you must have been high when you said that it was like a gateway drug. And everyone was like, oh.
Yeah, everyone was like, oh, shit.
Easy
thank
hit.
You so
well,
much.
we're not done.
Oh, my God, I said
sorry.
Thank you so much,
I thought you were
Dan.
signing us off.
No, of course not. Thank you so much, Dan Keating, for your
And-
donation. You are the best. And thank you so much, Ray. We love you too. We appreciate you very, very much. Thank you so much, both of y'all.
Don't worry, we're still going. I thought that I
You
was
have more
trying to end
notes?
that. I got some more notes. Well, one thing that I thought was important that, you know, is another example of like Warren getting to run with a policy without being challenged by Sanders on something they're very clearly different on, is when it came to housing, right?
I totally missed that.
So there's this, they brought up housing, affordable housing, and Warren's like, I have a plan for that. And part of Warren's plan is
I
building.
got a plan for that.
Yeah.
Two pennies on my chest.
Yeah, 2 pennies. Oh man, apparently they're really trying to make a thing out of this 2 cents thing, where they have like they had some campaign people dress up as pennies, and they have like these Mickey Mouse ears that are pennies, 2 pennies that they have people wear.
That's her plan for
And
housing,
then they
is
had
cut
their
2
big-
pennies off your rent.
Yeah, their big structural Bailey, the big inflatable dog, has like 2 pennies on his chest. But it's like, what is, even when she was explaining, it's like, what is 2 pennies? Doesn't seem like we'll get it. Like, what's the deal with it?
Like you said, she's speaking to the political class, being like, I'll only cut 2 cents, like almost like speaking directly to them. Like, don't worry, you're only going to get 2 cents cut off of every dollar.
Well, apparently part of this 2 cents wealth tax is building 3 million affordable housing units. That's part of Warren's plan. Great. So she's up there as the most progressive candidate on housing. I'm going to build 3 million new affordable housing units. And you see Bernie waving it, being like, come on, let me in.
Kept going in front of Biden, and Biden's just like the stone cold black eyes.
And they don't let him in. And they didn't let him in because Bernie's plan is to build 10 million affordable housing units. That's like almost 4 times as much as Warren's.
And national rent control, whereas Warren's plan on housing is to reduce rent by 10% over the next decade. I feel like we'll all be homeless by then, but great plan, Warren.
And people who are active in the affordable housing struggle estimate that there's about 7.5 million affordable housing units needed. We need 7.5 million quality affordable housing units in this country to solve the problem. Bernie's plan goes way above and beyond that. And can accommodate even larger numbers of people who maybe not under that line of needing affordable housing, but who still need dignified housing. Warren's plan is less than half of what's required for affordable housing. So that was just another example of Warren getting to go off and seem as though she has the most progressive and the best plan. And then there's no contrast with someone who has a pretty radical plan on that. Bernie's plan also, part of his housing plan is to end homelessness completely, end it. I mean, we live in Los Angeles, and we are confronted every single day with the realities of homelessness in this country. And so to hear someone saying that they will provide a home for every single one of the people that we see every day.
Is he really saying that?
Yeah, end homelessness completely. And it's interesting. I mean, it's
how though? Like just with all affordable housing?
Yeah, building affordable housing units and
because
treatment
even 10
programs.
million is not. I mean, there's far more homeless.
I think total. There's like, honestly, there's like less than 7 million. There's like at one time, there's like 500,000 homeless people sleeping on the streets. So it's quite possible. It's not an impossible thing. It seems worse to us because we live in the most dense population of homeless people in the country. And I think these things like go hand in hand. It's like, it's not just about providing homes for people, but healthcare is a huge part of it. I mean, the number of homeless people we see in LA who are missing a foot or missing a leg,
it's horrifying.
It's so common. It's like 10 or more percent. That's from diabetes, an easily treatable thing. Getting an infection in your foot from not enough treatment for your diabetes, and you just get your foot cut off.
Devastating.
I mean, it's hard to believe this is the richest country in the world. Drug treatment, mental health care, all of these things that would be provided in his Medicare for All plan that I believe is kind of dropped in Warren's plan if we'd ever get to it.
One quick comment is guilty pleasure. I like watching the show Intervention sometimes. And it's so bizarre too, because every time that they're talking about these episodes and like the heroin epidemic in different cities like that, and they're just like, we have no idea like why this has gotten so bad. We have no idea why like crime is off the charts. Like the heroin crisis is spiked. And it's like, I have a fucking idea. Like provide people healthcare and mental health treatment. And then, going back to these diseases of despair argument, maybe we would see people using less drugs if you keep, stop stockpiling them with pharmaceutical pills. And then once they run out, they have to go to the streets for heroin. And if they can get proper healthcare, they can get proper treatment. So it's just so bizarre that these people are just like not connecting the dots. And they're just like, well, we can't do anything about it. This is just really crazy and unique to America. Oh, well.
Yeah. Patrick, thank you for the donation. Mayor Pete 100% wants to invade Mexico, and you could tell by how mad he got tonight after Tulsi slammed him, which he did. Free Palestine. Thank you, Patrick, for that very good
Patrick,
comment.
You're right. Little Mayor Pete is just such a trigger-happy little child serial killer. Very disturbing. Yeah, I guess he's really, really quick to just advocate deploying troops everywhere in the world, including Mexico.
Yeah.
Very strange.
Awful. It's interesting too when they went after, or Kamala went after Buttigieg on his race issues, which is quite justifiable because Buttigieg is hated by the black community in his home state for real reasons. I mean, refusing to to investigate issues of police killings. Like you have people
Someone
telling.
said too much swearing. Sad.
Oh no, I'm so sorry. Well, you're
We're
not going to
sorry.
like what I'm going to say now because I'm saying the funny thing about how Pete defended himself. And there's a woman, a black mother in Indiana. Is that where he's from? Whatever.
Yeah. Bend.
And
Right.
yeah, South Bend, Indiana. Where he got 8,000 votes to become mayor. What a great.
I think 11,000, but yeah, still very little.
No, it was 8 something.
Oh God.
Yeah, it was under 10. There's a woman whose son was hanged, like lynched, and she always hates Pete Buttigieg. She's like, he would not help me at all. He would not provide any. This is a small area. South Bend is like not big, so you'd think if you're the mayor and something like that happens, you'd want to maybe try to help resolve it, but he didn't. So he's hated by the black community everywhere, especially where he lives. So Kamala rightfully took him to task for this. She has her own record of putting black people in jail for her entire life. Black mothers in jail for like their kids being late to school and things like that. So she's no champion of black women as she tried to be on the stage, but she was right to hit Pete for that. And his defense was him trying to appeal to the black community was this kind of like cheap thing where he's like, my faith teaches me that we have to fight for everyone. Basically being like, I'm a Christian, I believe in Jesus, because like that's what black people want to hear, right? It was like a very like, sounds like someone who's just like like advised by a white person, like, oh, black people like church and like they want to hear you talk about Jesus. So if you get called out for having no respect in the black community because you refuse to take on issues of justice that affect the black community, just talk about Jesus and they'll like you. It's like.
So we have another super chat question by H37. Any 2019 arguments for Ron Paul 2020? Look, I think Ron Paul is really great on the foreign policy front. I disagree vehemently with his economic policy. I couldn't disagree with him more on that. But I do think that he did push the Overton window back in 2004, especially when he was calling close all military bases, end all wars. I mean, talk about the foreign policy candidate. He was really pushing the rhetoric farther than I feel like anyone had before in the height of kind of this Bush war on terror that we were seeing. And it was really, really important. I felt like that was a really crucial voice on the stage. And I still do appreciate the Ron Paul Liberty Report for pushing those issues and really keeping that front and center that the U.S. empire needs to end. So props to him for doing that. That was appreciated during the 2003 election.
Thank you, Balthazar, for another donation. Man, you are a VIP tonight. So I think that was all the notes we had of that debate. Not really much else happened in it. As we said, it was like
very
bad.
Uneventful.
You know what? Another funny question to Bernie was another really weird thing that I didn't really catch, but like, so apparently, remember when Trump people were chanting "lock him up"?
Oh my God, that was so bad.
Was it at a baseball game or was that a Bernie?
It was
thing?
At a Bernie rally. They said it like twice. They were just like, lock him up, lock him up.
Yeah.
And
so then
Bernie,
they asked Bernie about that.
Unlike
of all
Trump,
the fucking questions.
Bernie didn't like laugh and like look around like people were during the Hillary stuff.
Yeah, they tried to compare him to Trump by being like, Trump supporters said lock her up, and your supporters say lock him up.
It's like, first of all, it was said out of jest. And second of all, MSNBC and all of these like neoliberal like media establishment commentators ferociously hammer on how Trump's a criminal and needs to be put in jail all day, every day. So this is the fruit of your labor. Like, what are you talking about? And then you try to hammer Bernie on it and be like, what do you have to say to that? Are you going to condemn your supporters for saying the same thing that Trump supporters said? That was ridiculous.
Yeah, it was messed up. And it's the thing that's so enraging for me is that like, there are so many other things that could have been. It's like you wasted a debate question on this. I mean, every question of Bernie was framed as, can we get a negative soundbite out of you? But it's like, it's taking up time. The debate was only 2 hours. There's like 15 minutes of commercials. Like, this is like an important election and whatever. It's like the fact that you would just waste all these questions on, ooh, can we get a gotcha on this? Can we poison people's opinion of Bernie on this? It's like, come the fuck on. Oh, sorry to the person who said no swearing.
Sorry, we swear a lot in our personal.
Ali Shali, thank you for the donation, saying, could you make an episode about the people of Bahrain being killed by the U.S.-backed government and by U.S.-made weapons?
Ollie, really, really great point. I would love to look more into that. Please send me an email at theempirefiles@gmail.com. I'm always open for commentary, suggestions, articles in terms of our coverage. We're getting back on the regular production of Empire Files very, very soon. We just wrapped up this giant tour. You can check out our first live stream about that if you become a patron for as little as $1 a month on patreon.com/empirefiles. And this live show will actually be only available to patrons in 24 hours, just like the last live show. So please consider donating as little as $1 a month so you can check out those live streams. However, our regular production for Empire Files will be available to everyone for free on our YouTube channel. So subscribe nonetheless. And we're really excited to get back in the swing of things and continue with our Trump Expanding the Empire series. The next episode will be on the Afghanistan war.
Yeah, so that Afghanistan piece is coming up. And as Abby said, this live stream, if you're watching it live and you didn't catch the whole thing, you got to become a patron to catch the whole thing. This video will then become private. Only patrons will get access to it. So please consider becoming a patron. Roy Vasquez, thank you for the donation. You guys are great. As to the homelessness, how do you solve people resisting change? To put it in an analogy, how do you make a horse drink water without drowning? They have opportunities for a better life and they reject it. I mean, I think that the way political change happens in this country is that there is ebbs and flows. You never know when they're going to happen, but all of a sudden there's kind of heightened consciousness and people are in political motion in a way that you never thought possible. We saw that with the Occupy movement, with the anti-war movement, with the immigrant rights movement. These were all periods where there was no protests happening at all, no political action. And then all of a sudden, you never know what it is, the straw that breaks the camel's back or whatever, something will happen. Just like with Ferguson and Black Lives Matter. Like
Occupy,
police were killing people every day. All of them were enraging and horrible racist murders. But one that was just the same as all the others led to this huge, massive movement and kind of like nationwide changing political struggle. So you never know what it's going to be. And so because the kind of contradictions are always building, we know that it's inevitable, that there's going to be mass upsurges of people. We don't know when that's going to be, but we know it's inevitable. We can see it bubbling under the surface. Everywhere we go, you can kind of feel that it's something that's an inevitability. And when that happens, it's those who are the activists, the political organizers who become more relevant, who become more listened to, the people like us who you think, well, I wish more people would listen to what political people have to say, what political organizers and organizations have to say. They are listened to at times of great political upsurge. And so it's about preparing in the meantime for those moments of mass consciousness.
Yeah, I'm greatly inspired by the millions of people who are rejecting the corporate media status quo, the bipartisan foreign policy establishment, and the duopoly of our political establishment. I find that greatly motivating, empowering. It makes me want to be in the streets, be in the middle of the struggle, because like Mike said, you never know when these spikes are going to happen. And that's where we need to fill the vacuum, show people that there's a more radical way to build outside of the system if the system continues to shut us down. And we'll always be there ready to go. And we encourage you to be out there with us. One last comment is we just put up Gaza Fights for Freedom in Arabic on Vimeo. Please check that out. Spread the word. It's really exciting to get out there in Arabic. We're also putting it out in Spanish. We also have DVDs available that you can buy, agitator packs, educate your friends and families for Christmas or over the holiday season about Israeli war crimes. So it's very important to do this. We're all doing it grassroots. So please check that out on GazaFightsForFreedom.com.
And you can get that merch at empire-files.myshopify.com to get the DVDs and Gaza shirts. Hansi, thank you for the donation. Great meeting you in Toronto also.
Yay,
and
nice
Captain Waffles, thank you also. Reading your comment, NBC is flipping reality, crediting Pete with Tulsi's line she used on him. Check out NBC's Twitter for the shameful shame of a tweet. What a bunch of idiots. I'm not surprised.
Oh, God.
So now that since we've gotten through our notes, there's still a lot of people watching and more than in the past live stream, and we're earlier in the live stream. So we can just take some questions. I mean, if you want to keep going for a little bit, and just maybe a couple more questions we can answer before we sign off, since people are still here.
Yeah, we'd love some comments on what you want to see next. As we said, we have a lot of things on the shelf. We're doing Afghanistan war. We're doing Trump's expansion of the empire in Africa. We're going to keep talking about Latin America, of course, as this coup continues to unravel. It is really, really devastating what's going on. Outright massacres happening daily of indigenous and poor campesinos. Very, very horrific. You can also check out Eyes Left. Mike has a podcast that he hosts with Spencer Rapone, another anti-war veteran. Check it out on all available streaming platforms. I host a podcast called Media Roots Radio with my brother Robbie Martin that you can check out on all available streaming platforms as well. We're covering a lot of stuff. We just covered the Chilean protests, the kind of betrayal from Lenin Moreno in Ecuador with this recent austerity measure that was revamped by an indigenous push in a recent uprising as well. So definitely check that out. A lot of things going on. Hard to get to them all. I feel like we've missed out on this whole wave of protests among the Middle East, especially with Iraq. Very, very devastating what's going on there. Over 300 people have been shot down by snipers with live ammunition. It is absolutely horrific, Mike. I don't know if you've seen these videos of just opening machine guns on unarmed protesters and then killing the people who are trying to help the wounded, kidnapping emergency workers, and it's just really devastating. They've actually concocted this giant Occupy-style encampment in Tahrir Square to supply people and protesters with basic amenities like electricity, water, housing, which is really all that they're calling for is basic dignity. It's just absolutely disgusting what's going on. But of course, you don't hear about those protests, do you? You don't hear Trump talk about bringing democracy again to Iraq, because all of these maneuvers from Syria has just been to cement this permanent occupation in Iraq, put more troops there, double or triple the amount under the Trump administration, and the oil's never stopped flowing, Mike.
Yeah. Ray Foley, thank you for the donation. Appreciate you, man. One of the questions that I think is good, I lost it. Oh, yeah. So from Riley Morgan, what's the most constructive thing we can do to help Bernie beat the system that is trying so hard to stop him from winning? I think that's a great question to kind of wrap up the debate analysis, because I did want to say about the debates. I mean, the struggle around this presidential election and all of Bernie's demands that are by far the most radical of the Democratic primary field, from all of the issues, right? From nationalizing utility companies, right? So PG&E and what's the one in New York? It's to actually make them public property. These are really radical things. For example, his program on prisons and mass incarceration is essentially the program of the California prisoner strikers, the inmates of the 13 prisons that waged this huge political strike for their demands to be met. Bernie just took their demands and made it his platform on mass incarceration. So these are things that we haven't really seen before. The free college for all, universal healthcare, all these things. They're pretty radical reforms. And I think that the comment that I have on that is also how, if you want to help Bernie win, one of the ways I think you can help Bernie win outside of campaigning. This struggle and this election is about reforming capitalism and making it so we have a system that people aren't suffering to the degree that they're suffering under today's system. I think that it's good to fight for reforms. Any reform that makes workers' lives better is important, and we should fight for it. And people who are willing to go out there far against the establishment, like Bernie is, to try to win really radical, somewhat revolutionary reforms, is very important. But Abby and I both, I think you'd agree, is that we don't want to just reform capitalism. I mean, capitalism inherently has all of these problems, has racism, has exploitation, has inequality, has war, right? We have war because we're an imperialist country. Imperialism isn't like an adjective to describe a policy or leadership. Imperialism is an economic stage of development. It's a stage of capitalism when you've expanded as much as you can increase profits within your own borders, and you must go outside your borders to steal resources and exploit other populations. I mean, that's what imperialism is. It's not a decision. It's an inevitable growth of a system. And if it isn't an imperialist country, it can't survive. America can't survive without being imperialist as a capitalist country. If it closes down all its bases and cuts off all its exploitative relationships with all these other countries, economically, the system would collapse. It cannot, because capitalism is about constantly increasing profits. And so, we need to fight against capitalism as a system And it's important to support social struggles and social movements and communities who are fighting for reforms within that system. But I think that everyone needs to be an active participant in fighting the system of imperialism and the system of capitalism as a whole. And I think that doing that in your own ways, if you're campaigning for Bernie, of course, there's so many ways, and it's a very active campaign. You can get this Burn app. You can get it in the App Store, and it shows you all the events near you where people are phone banking, campaigning, things like that. But I think that even just by being active in the anti-capitalist, anti-war movement, you're building kind of this, what has pushed Bernie so far to the left. I mean, he was pushed to his positions by not people campaigning for Bernie, but by people just from below who are active in their own important social justice and anti-war issues that made him adopt those positions, like the California prisoner strikers I was mentioning. They weren't like, we got to convince Bernie to adopt this position. They were just in struggle. And so by grassroots action, that's anti-capitalist, anti-military industrial complex, anti-mass incarceration. Those things influence politics in this country as a whole, and those things are helping Bernie Sanders right now.
Absolutely. Well said.
Another question?
No, I think that we're ready to wrap it up.
All right, y'all. Okay, as we wrap up, if anyone wants to, all right, no other super chat questions in here.
I think that we're good.
Last chance, wrapping it up.
I think that we're good. Thank you so much for tuning into our post-debate analysis. I hope that we left you a little bit more recharged than this boring debate left us after we watched it. And I left you a little bit inspired with some commentary. So we plan to do these much more often. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel at Empire Files. Please become a patron at patreon.com/Empire Files. And check out our stuff. We have one last question from Balthazar228. Is there a way to circumvent Russia bait questions by referring to all the election integrity and security measures we still haven't taken, and how going renewable would completely end our dependence on fossil fuel? Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting. All of this Russia baiting, right, and the Russia fear-mongering completely obfuscates and avoids the question of actual election integrity. These are issues that Greg Palast, our friend, investigative reporter, has been addressing for his entire life. The fact that voter ID laws disproportionately affect the most radical voters, a lot of people of color, and this is completely unaddressed by our Democratic establishment. Why is that? Why is that? Why is it that they don't want people to vote? So I find that very strange, the fact that election integrity is just completely unaddressed among the most important issues, which is things like voter ID, things like gerrymandering, things like the Electoral College, things like when Elizabeth Warren was asked by Amy Goodman, these primary states are kind of supersede the importance of other states, primarily of people of color. And she just said, I'm a player in the game. I think these are really important questions to address, because while everyone's obsessed with Russia, there's much larger issues at stake that really go to the heart of why our democratic and electoral process is so fundamentally flawed. And until we address those, we cannot say that we live in a democracy. We live in a complete oligarchy, and it's really unfortunate. So we can only do the best we can. And as we know, there's a lot of shady stuff going on at these primaries and at these elections. So we have to really show up en masse and really shut things down, kind of similar to what Obrador's supporters did in Mexico, and really go against the grain, because they're expecting us to stay at home. They're expecting us to not care. And again, I hate to put too much faith in the electoral system. This is about us. This is about us getting out in the streets, pushing these policies ourselves. We can't just go dormant every 4 years between these election cycles. We have to be involved every single day of our lives. We cannot make the system beat us down and let us lay down and die. We have to stand up and fight. And I'm trusting all of you to do that with us and get involved with local movements, get involved with anti-war activism. It's time to resurrect an actual anti-war movement in this country, link our struggles together, and realize what our government is doing in our name around the world. So thank you so much for your questions, comments. We appreciate you all so much for tuning in on this abysmal Democratic debate. We hope our analysis kind of brought you out of that. And yeah, we look forward to hearing more from you. Again, empirefiles.com. YouTube. Subscribe to us on YouTube at Empire Files, and patreon.com/empirefiles. Please become a supporter. Consider donating to us. We appreciate you very much.
And thanks, Tom Young, for the last minute donation. Thanks for joining us, y'all.
Peace.